Well, thank you very much. And thank you for your patience with me trying to get back on. My computer seems to not like videos this week. I think I've been on an exhaustive round of video calls, as we all have. I wanted to start by thanking you and saying, hello, my name is Erin Mills. I'm the Director of Labor Market Information and HR Research with MiHR, which is the Mining Industry Human Resources Council. And to thank you very much for inviting us to this meeting. It's been really interesting so far, a very nice and welcoming group, and thank you. So Jamie and I are just going to run through one of our, the most recent report that we've worked on. It was released in May. It was supposed to be released at CIM in May, obviously, and we couldn't do that because of COVID. So we have a number of videos on our website. If you're interested, you can also visit the website for more information about the report and other things that we do. So I'll just get Jamie to flip through the slides, and then I'll pass it over to Jamie. So just a little bit about us. So we refer to ourselves as MiHR. So we're considered Canada's knowledge center for mining labor market information. I am not a miner. I'm not an engineer. I have never worked in mining. We have staff that have worked in mining that are geologists, and we rely on them a great deal for information. But I have my expertise is in labor markets and employment and post-secondary education. And Jamie is our chief labor economist, and he's going to take over once I finish a first couple of slides. So just a little bit again, so our goal is to lead collaboration across the Canadian mining sector to understand labor market trends, identify opportunities, and develop solutions. We have a daunting array of research tools, reports on our website. We've worked on custom studies in Nunavut. We work with post-secondary institutions. We work with mining employers. We work with governments. We work with Indigenous communities. We work with developing training programs and wage subsidies for youth. So we're kind of all over the place, and we do some work internationally as well. At the moment, we're focused on COVID recovery and looking at how COVID has impacted the mining sector. And again, the data is fairly new, so we're as things roll in, we're on it. We're looking at providing some kind of analysis as we go forward in the future. So anytime you want to reach out to Jamie or myself, we're in Ottawa, and I don't know, I understand that Houston was very hot. It's also about 33 degrees here, and I have my central air on, and I am sweating. So apologies for melting here in front of the screen, but it is very, very warm and humid. So we have a 14-person board of directors, and we have 20 staff, and we're located in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. So we welcome, we encourage you to visit our website, or just send Jamie or I an email to if you want any more information. We'd be happy to continue the dialogue. Next slide. So this is our report. It's called The Changing Nature of Work, and it's based on 2 years of research that we pursued in pursuit of MiHR's vision to understand, similar to yours, the evolving workforce, what's happening with the impact of innovation on our workers. Obviously, I like the point that you made that, technology is one thing, but the impact on people is another. And we set out to do a report which took us down a lot of different rabbit holes, and it was pretty exciting, and we certainly learned a lot. It is a vast area of research, and I'll tell you a little bit as much as I can in a 20-minute presentation. So the primary research objective is to understand how innovation and automation are impacting the workforce. Next slide. So the report is centered around 4 main questions. What new technologies are currently being introduced in the sector? Now, we're not providing a critique of these innovations or technologies. So we're doing a bit of a scan as to what's being implemented, what's being adopted, what's of interest. So we do touch on a lot of those innovations in the report. Who will be disrupted by these new technologies? How will skills requirements change as a result? And what can mining stakeholders do to better prepare for these changes? So these were our central themes for investigation in the report. Next slide. So I'm just going to cover the report actually has a qualitative and has a quantitative component. So I'm just going to touch on the qualitative component, and then I'll turn it over to Jamie to talk about the quantitative side of things, which is pretty innovative in itself and pretty exciting. So with respect to our qualitative work and our literature review, we spent quite a long time looking at the literature internationally on innovation in mining. And as I said, it was quite daunting, and I mean, it's an extensive body of research, and it was done over a year ago. We recognize that even now it's certainly changing, and there's a lot more new research. But We did, so a lot of the literature reviews in the report as well. So the qualitative side of it was we had 125 Canadian mining stakeholders with direct relevant knowledge of the Canadian mining context. So we consulted with them through a variety of focus groups, online surveys, case studies, validation sessions, in-depth interviews. We wanted to get a good sense of what they felt was happening with respect to innovation. So we hope that you visit the report for more details on the qualitative and the quantitative. Next slide. I just wanted to touch on just a few of the quotes and let the voices of our stakeholders speak for themselves. Obviously, what came out in the literature review and in the interviews was technology is a huge cost saver. I mean, the benefits were agreed upon, wholeheartedly. There's health and safety issues. It helps monitoring, information, performance, and sustainability, competitiveness, environmental issues. So that was there was vast agreement on that. That was very clear to us. So a lot of the stakeholders talked about how their views were mixed. Technologies aren't going to provoke a reduction in the workforce, but a fundamental change. So it wouldn't necessarily reduce the number of people working, but it would certainly change things up. People felt that there was a huge miscommunication when new technologies were adopted. There was a lot of hesitation, there was some reluctance, and there was a bit of resistance talked about with the implementation of new technologies. So, we all see these technologies coming into play, and they're very exciting, and there's a lot of benefits and a lot of excitement around them, but there's a lot of change that needs to be managed when these new technologies are introduced to a workforce. Some of the older folks definitely expressed trepidation. We also talked to employees. They expressed trepidation in how their work might get impacted, their jobs, whether or not they were unionized had an impact. So there was certainly, the views were definitely mixed with respect to implementing these new technologies. What else came out was that leveraging the new technologies could certainly increase the number of people interested in mining work. So it would help us to diversify. MiHR does a lot of work on inclusion and diversity as well. And we certainly saw a lot through the interviews where folks expressed a lot of excitement around the fact that it could increase access for a number of people. As well, there's a gaming side of things. So it would attract a large number of youth to different types of work. Next slide. Just a couple more quotes just to illustrate some of the findings that we had from the qualitative again. So understanding and working with new technologies will require skills to evolve. New roles will be created, including those that don't exist, and our understanding of new technologies and awareness of how we apply them will be critical. So as we move forward, really how we introduce them and how we implement them will be really, really imperative. Again, innovative changes are good for diversity. It broadens the approach to diversify talent and allows us to attract new people with new skills and open up the workforce. We certainly acknowledge that some of the interviewees expressed concern and caution over some of the new technologies, how it would impact Indigenous communities. So we're certainly cognizant of that. In some cases, because mines are located so close to these communities, it might have an effect on the community as these new technologies are pushed to more remote locations. So new immigrants, or recent immigrants who are located in more central areas of Canada would have easier access to some of the employment opportunities, whereas some of the Indigenous communities might be impacted. Now, it's still early days and the views are very mixed, and we're going to be continuing to monitor this. This isn't our last report on innovation. This is just the start, and Jamie and I have talked a lot about this, that we've just opened up a can of worms, and this is just the beginning. So we're just starting to scratch the surface. Last quote was, "We need curious people wanting to learn, to maintain and grow their knowledge and embrace innovative and new technologies." So really, there was a real interest in having people who have soft skills and technical skills, new skills, gaming skills, data analysis skills, big data, a lot of different types of skills that it would create in the creation of new roles. Next slide. So one last thing for me, I just want to talk a little bit about the case studies that we did. We had an opportunity to do 3 case studies and to bring the teams on site, 2 Canadian mine sites and 1 training facility. So these folks were gracious enough to allow us into their operations to have a good look and spend, you know, a couple of days learning about their digital innovations and their related training programs. So Agnico Eagle mines, Anaconda, and Norcat were the three places that we visited. All three of these firms certainly recognize the need for increased technological capacity as a pathway to the future. Some of the highlights, and again, these are profiled in the innovation report. There's good pictures and good quotes, and there's a real good, there's lots of context about how they're going about these. Agnico Eagle's piloting of autonomous vehicles, underground and related training. Anaconda's implementation of sustainable mining by drilling, and the Anaconda University platform, which is pretty exciting. Norcat's Advanced Simulation Training Center, where operators can actually sit in the driver's seat. We had an opportunity to experience how they were going about developing these projects and the impact on their employees. So in all three cases, we learned that people were pretty excited about it, employees were very excited about it, and the companies were certainly trying to embrace the needs of employees while introducing the cost saving and you know, all the different benefits that that innovation can bring to work. That's pretty much for me. I'm going to pass it over to Jamie to continue on to talk about our main research questions, who's at risk, and I'll leave it with Jamie. So thank you very much. Nice to see everybody, and I hope we have another opportunity to connect in the future.
Thank you, Erin. Can everyone hear me okay? Is my volume good?
Yep.
Good. All right. So thanks, Erin. First, I just want to thank everyone for their interest in this presentation and just for inviting me to speak. Very excited to share this, the quantitative side of the research that we have done. So this, as Erin has mentioned, has been a topic that has been on our radar for several years now. And it certainly has been a trending topic in recent years as well, especially since before COVID. I think this was the topic. So today I'm happy to share with you our take on the matter. So just to say that we're looking at this through the labor market lens. So that means while innovation and technology is a central theme, we always come back to the impact that things will have on workers and the labor market. So one of our themes, and I stress that one, there's other things in our work here, but one of the bigger parts of this work is this idea of occupational vulnerability. So we are interested in which occupations are exposed to the downside risks of innovation. So in other words, we're asking who may be vulnerable. And we explore, after that, we are going to explore the specific reasons for that. So we're hopeful that this information can be used to make informed decisions. So that may include strategies or tools to mitigate the risks for those who are vulnerable. And the objective here is to identify where we should focus our attention and resources so, you know, that we could develop a stronger labor market. So before I get into this analysis, this occupational vulnerability, I want to show a couple of interesting pictures. These kind of set the stage for how Canada's mining sector has evolved over the last few decades. And I think it goes without saying that mining is fairly capital intensive. So this graph shows the ratio of capital input to labor input in the mining industry since 1980. And we can see that indeed there is a trend of further capital intensification that has occurred over that period of time. And over the same period of time, we see a shift in educational attainment. So as the industry was becoming more capital intensive, they have also employed more people with post-secondary education as well. So what we're seeing here is that a shift in capital and labor and education requirements is not unprecedented in this sector. So that leads me back to the analysis that I'm here to share with you. And you know, we know that the industry's labor inputs are capable of evolving, and we want to understand how this may be disruptive to people in the process. So that brings me back to this vulnerability idea. So I think that everyone is clear, and Erin has mentioned, the upsides of innovation. So whether that is health or safety, environmental benefits, productivity benefits, cost reduction. The downsides, however, are a little more ambiguous. For example, the extent of disruption is still very much unclear. So in other words, how far will new technologies eventually go? If we think of the long arm of technology, how far is that arm? That is something that is very much still uncertain. We're also unsure of the pace of technological disruption. So a new technology may exist, but that doesn't guarantee that it will be immediately adopted and integrated into an operation. The example that we like to pick on is self-driving vehicles. So these have actually existed for years, and we all think of this as potentially disruptive, but we are less certain as to the extent of this change and really how many jobs are going to be lost, which jobs will be lost. So for example, is it going to be a driver? Is it going to be a mechanic? And which jobs will be changed as a result of this? And we're also unsure of how quickly this will fold. So within a couple years or within several decades. So if we are concerned with vulnerability, then timing is important. So just to give you an example, if I have 3 decades to plan for my job to be replaced, then am I really being disruptive? Am I really vulnerable? So there are several factors that also determine, whether a new technology has the potential to be a disruptive one, such as its feasibility, its capital expenditure, prices, markets. There's a whole bunch of factors that play into these ideas. So what is the challenge? So these uncertainties make it difficult for us to answer our primary question here. So who is vulnerable and why? They also make it difficult for people, everyday people, to navigate the labor market. So a worker may want to know what skills may be marketable, not just now, but in the future. And employers and educators, they want to understand if their labor market can sustain the operational needs. And that sort of brings the challenges forward. So how does our organization address this challenge with what we do? So our team has developed what we call labor market information, or LMI, which is just another way of saying that we want to use data to measure this problem. So we do this by looking at several indicators, and that's going to give us clues regarding which operations will face the greatest risks. Sorry, occupations. Which occupations will face the greatest risks. So we aggregate these indicators into a composite score that gauges occupational vulnerability. So we want to pack all this information into one number. And we want to be able to look at this number as a kind of a signal that sort of indicates to people, am I vulnerable or am I not? So I just want to mention there are other well-known examples of an index that combines several variables. So the famous ones are the S&P 500, CPI, Human Development Index, among others. So similar to these, we are introducing MiHR's Occupational Vulnerability Index. So it has the acronym MOVI for short. And again, this is to provide a flag or a signal of workers who are found to have the most exposure to the downside risks of innovation. So later in this presentation, I also want to show how we may understand how certain occupations are uniquely vulnerable. So what makes an occupation vulnerable? So our framework looks at 2 main criteria. So those are going to be in blue. So the first one is technological disruption. So in other words, is the robot coming for my job? And the second one we are calling worker adaptability. So in the event that I am disrupted, am I able to stay on my feet? And so to get closer to answering these questions, we start to characterize certain sub-themes. So under technological disruption, we're interested in 3 sub-themes. The first is scope of innovation. So is there a technology that's capable of doing my job? Incentives for disruption. Is there an incentive for an organization to bring in job replacing technologies? So this could be an economic incentive, environmental, safety incentives. And finally, we're looking at social and regulatory obligations. So are there any hurdles that must be cleared before a job replacing technology is able to be adopted? So under worker adaptability, we are interested in two sub-themes. So first is the transferability of skills. So we're saying, do my skills overlap with other roles in the economy? And then the second one we're talking about is geographic labor mobility. So this is talking about the ability to move closer to alternative employment. So together, these factors are going to push and pull on an occupation's vulnerability level. And we can insert any occupation into this model. And we have done that for 120 occupations that we have deemed sort of relevant to the mining sector in Canada. So we use this framework as a roadmap for gathering data and then amassing it and then making a composite index out of it. So I won't have time to go through all of this today, but all of this information is in the report. So if you are curious, feel free to investigate that. So we have gathered key variables and indicators that characterize our themes. And again, yeah, we've built a composite score. To build the score, we considered several methods, but ultimately we followed the OECD's handbook for building composite indicators. I also want to note that in this project, we note that we want to sort of build on this in future iterations as we evolve, maybe with better data. And in many ways, this is a bit of a beta pilot that we're looking to improve upon this foundation. So again, we use this framework, 120 mining relevant occupations. So these occupations will include everything from underground miner to mechanic, to engineer, to geologist. And so that means we have produced 120 MOVI scores. So a MOVI score will range from 0 to 1. So 1 being the most vulnerable, 0 being the least. And each of these scores will have all these ingredients compiled into one number. And I'm going to get to the outcomes of this. So here is what they look like on a histogram. We see a fairly even distribution. So at this point, we want to know, what is a bad MOVI score? So if I told you that your MOVI score was a 0.73, should you be worried about that? And that's sort of the idea here. And I just want to also point out that, like other indices, the only way to interpret this is in comparison to other scores. So it's the relativeness of it that is important. So in the table here, we've listed some statistics. The average occupation has a MOVI score of 0.44. The middle 50% of occupations, so that's in the bluish region there, is between 0.32 and 0.54. So we're saying if you're above that, you're in the top, if you're above 0.54, you're in the top 25%, you're relatively high. If you're below that, you're relatively low. So now that we sort of have a way of knowing which occupations have a high MOVI, now we want to know how many people are in those occupations. So here's the distribution of MOVI scores for 70,000 workers in mining and quarrying sector in Canada. So the typical mining occupation has, again, has a 0.44 score. The typical mining worker has a 0.57 score. So we see that distribution is skewed to the right, as there are several mining workers that are in occupations with higher MOVI scores. So here's another way to visualize this in this picture here. So each point corresponds to an occupation. On the vertical axis, so that's our MOVI score. So the more vulnerable occupations are going to be higher in the graph. On the horizontal axis, we have the size of the mining workforce in that occupation. So as we move up and to the right, we say that there is a higher exposure for the mining workforce. These are the areas of concern. So for example, the highest MOVI score is underground miners. So that has a MOVI of 0.75. So not only does this have the highest MOVI, it also has the largest contingent of workers in Canada's mining and quarrying sector. So that gives us a signal to pay attention to this occupation. And I also want to be clear, this is not saying that everyone with a high MOVI is on a set path to losing their job. What this is saying is that there is both the means, the incentives, and the environment for these occupations to be disrupted. So this could include job loss. It also could mean people will be required to adapt to working in a different way or working with different skills and technologies. So basically, this is showing that the status quo will be under threat. So here's the exact same graph as in the previous slide, but we have organized the 120 occupations into broad categories. And we can see here that production occupations are the most at risk in the upper right corner there, in the so-called danger zone. In contrast, the least exposed occupations are the physical sciences and HR and financial occupations. Here we have a pair of graphs that highlight two key demographic groups in mining, obviously, as I listened to the previous presentation. So that'd be Indigenous workers and women. So in this picture, we swapped out the horizontal axis. Instead of the size of the workforce, now we are showing the share of workers in each category. And as we can see, in both cases, there is some exposure here. So meaning that there are a few occupations that have both a high MOVI and a large share of either Indigenous workers or women in those roles. And it's unfortunate, I should have done this for men as well for sort of a comparison, but I don't have that picture here today. So I can't tell you if that's particularly bad or not. Okay, so up until now, I have presented the MOVI as one number. And I want to just acknowledge that this cannot tell us everything. So again, the MOVI is a rough indicator of things. So that means we can have two occupations that may have the same MOVI score, but for very different reasons. So we would like to unpack this a little bit. So to do that, we use spider charts. So this is a visualization that allows us to see the different ingredients that were involved in the MOVI in its development. So this gives us a way to uniquely identify why exactly an occupation is vulnerable. So then we may have the right antidote and make informed decisions. So these charts will align with the framework, the MOVI framework that I had described earlier. So the MOVI score is at the top at 12 o'clock. And then going clockwise are the sub-themes that I had shown previously described. So the greater area sort of equals the greater exposure to disruption from tech. We also see a comparative reference there for the average MOVI in all occupations and for the specific broad occupational category that occupation is in. So here I've provided three examples. The largest MOVI is on the left, so that's underground miners. The smallest MOVI is in the middle, and that's industrial engineering technicians. And on the right, we have construction millwrights. And I added that one because it kind of illustrates how we might use this information. So we can see millwrights have a relatively average size MOVI, but when it comes to job transferability of skills, which was one of our dimensions, that particular one is not really a contributing factor to this MOVI score. So if we are thinking about mitigating, exposure or risk for construction millwrights, then maybe this aspect, transferability of skills, is not going to be the most effective route in that case. So you can see how every occupation has a unique flavor of what makes them vulnerable. And we want to consider those things as we navigate for the correct solutions. So that concludes the MOVI score. So moving forward, again, as I said, this is a bit of a pilot. I think we wanted to start with our concepts, get those pretty clear, develop a framework. I think there is definitely room for improvement on taking this to industry experts and amassing better data inputs and getting just sort of ironing out the execution and making sure that we have a solid a thing that we're working on here. But ultimately, the idea is to help flag and inform so that people can prepare. Basically, is what this is about. So that concludes my presentation. If anyone has any questions, thank you.
Thank you so much, both of you. It was a really informative presentation. Thank you. Lauren, do we have any questions? I think we do.
Yes, we do. So Ramona, she asks, based on your conversations with management of mining companies, what's the level of commitment of mining companies in general to invest in upskilling?
I'll jump in and answer that because that came out of the qualitative research. It's a really good question. To be honest, it was impressive. A lot of interest in this report. I mean, more interest than I've ever seen in any report. A lot of due diligence in finding out what the impact is and the feelings and the perceptions from the employee side. And certainly a lot of efforts to implement on a slow, even, and fair basis. So I was quite impressed with the responses from management and from mining. Any level of management was quite, they were quite keen to work with employees.
Just going through the messages here. Nona asks another question here. Also, how does Canada compare to Australia in terms of disruptive technology adoption rate in the mining industry? How is Australia dealing with occupational vulnerability?
I'll let Jamie answer that. I can just tell you from our lit review, Australia is light years ahead of Canada in some aspects in terms of how they're handling this and how they're embracing technologies and what they're actually doing. But I'll turn it over to Jamie to answer the rest of that because we did look at Australia as one key area of research.
Thanks, Erin. Yeah, so in terms of Australia, I think Australia has a very good reputation for actually being ahead of the curve, I think. That being said, I will sort of echo something Erin said earlier, and that is I am not an expert on mining technologies. And also my mandate in this project is for Canada's labor market. So a lot of the inputs that went into this I have taken as given. So if any of you are familiar with the Frey and Osborne score, I take that. So that's one of the inputs into this model. And basically it's talking about sort of these ideas, basically, the implementation of technology and how it may affect workers. I take that as a given input into this, and sort of leave the gearhead discussion to the proper people. We have people in our organization who are more oriented that way. My thing is labor markets. And my thing is Canada's mining labor market. So I can't really speak to Australia as strongly, but I do know that from the reputation, Australia is strong. So.
Also, we've had visits from representatives from the Australian government who recently visited us. I believe she was from Australia, right, Jamie?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. Who have a lot of interest in our report and in our approach and want to work with us collaboratively. So there's been a lot of collaboration, a lot of discussions from Australia for sure.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And I have just a couple more here. Were the stats in your initial graphs based on Canada or global? Also, are there any stats on jobs already lost due to tech advancement?
Thanks. Good question. The first couple slides that I showed were for Canada. Most things I do are focused on Canada, as that is sort of our organization's mandate is Canada's mining sector on the HR side. So everything I showed you in that whole slide deck is Canada. And then the second question was about job loss. So again, I think this illustrates a huge gap in knowledge and sort of ability to record data, attributing job loss to certain factors. I mean, we can certainly see it. I mean, I look at this all the time when you see the drop, when you're looking at employment moving along and then dropping suddenly, obviously is due to recent events. But it is very, very, other than the COVID factor of it all, it is very hard to attribute job loss to some of these things, absolutely. And I feel like that is a real challenge we struggle with here. So rather than try to wrestle that at this point, what we're doing is trying to flag where there is a potential for risk.
Can I, may I just follow on a little bit?
Yeah.
Have either during or I guess subsequent to your publication of this report, have you considered critical disruption impacts that, you know, maybe just wholly speculative at this time, but in 6 to 12 months, maybe new realities of what we can do in mining, how close workers can be together, and how that might disrupt production?
That certainly sounds like an awesome idea. I think I just want to be, I want to just highlight one thing that is that we completed this work. Geez, Aaron, when was it? It was
a year ago.
Last year. So at that point, when we pushed print, no one had ever heard of COVID.
Sure.
So obviously now when I'm now doing speaking engagements around this work, and that COVID thing comes up every time, and it's usually the same. It's very, why does it come up? Because it's very relevant to the conversation. It also sort of puts us in a new universe, I think, in terms of pushing people forward in adopting many things. I mean, look at us. We're having a meeting that may not have happened in the same exact format a year ago.
So,
maybe
yeah,
it has.
I mean,
yeah.
So the whole, you know, this whole period of time, during this period of time, I came across one quote by the famous capitalist Vladimir Lenin. He said, there are decades when nothing happens, and there are weeks when decades happen. And, and I think we're in one of those shifts in the context of mining. And I'm just concerned that what may emerge as a response to evolving understanding and criteria and governmental responses to what is feasible in any industrial setting. I'll look forward to your next study.
Yeah, I think you're also highlighting a really big issue there, is that if all the events of the world happen within a short span, how are we supposed to predict those things? It's very difficult, and we certainly didn't predict this when we did this work. But I think what we did instead, though, was build a foundation of what we think matters to a person as they are navigating the world. So that's why we bring in the worker adaptability. Do I have a job? So we're still asking, in the next publication, we're going to still ask the same question. Is my job similar to other jobs? If I lose my job, am I able to find new marketplaces? Am I able to move? Do I have mobility? And then we can always augment the discussion on, does the long arm of technology, is it capable of replacing my job? That thing is always going to be in flux, but the fundamental framework, the concept is still the same. And the next study, I feel like, or the next time we get to look at this, I feel like it's pretty much starting from the same fundamental concepts and framework, just with COVID now. So.
Can I just add to that, building on Jamie's comment? And you know, when we embarked on this study, what was really interesting was, you know, in the early days, we were invited to all kinds of events with government officials and whatnot. And I was quite intrigued by the level of interest, the fear amongst a lot of people. A lot of people just thought, you know, it was going to be, you know, overnight annihilation of jobs. And then there were other folks who were much more realistic that, you know, mining has always been a change. Change is constant in most things that we do, and particularly in mining. So technology it's not something completely different. We're always evolving. There's always tech change at some level. And you're right, I mean, it's a perfect quote to exemplify that. But it's how we embrace it, and it's how we move forward. But it was very fascinating that people that I thought should have known at the government level were predicting that things were going to evolve overnight. And what we certainly heard and what we certainly see is that it's not an instant thing. It's not a silver bullet that's going to transform mining overnight. It's going to be a bit of change over the next 20 to 30 years. And how that plays out is, you know, we're going to be watching and monitoring very carefully. So it's been a kind of an interesting journey through this report, and we certainly learned a lot. But we'll be working at this for a while.